Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. Today we're going to be going through what we call perceptions. Remember, in the study of organizational behavior, we're trying to understand who we are as individuals, understand how we perceive or relate with other people, understand these other people in terms of their personalities, their behavior, their stress level, emotions, etc. And then finally putting all of this into the context of the organization. So in being able to understand the other person, it's very important that we go through what we see as perceptions. So how do we perceive other people? How do we think about the other person? What are the thoughts that cross our minds when we hear a particular thing, when we see a particular thing? All of this will come under perceptions. Now, the interesting part about perception is there's also self-perception. So we also have a particular way of perceiving ourselves. So sometimes you think about yourself and you think, oh, I'm the best thing since sliced bread, which is great because that's how you see yourself, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every other person sees you in exactly the same way. And so that aligns with everything we're studying in terms of organizational behavior is how do we perceive ourselves? How do we perceive others? And then how can we ensure that at every given time, our perceptions are not flawed? And then even though they become flawed sometimes because we are human beings, but we're able to quickly catch on to this, make the changes that need to be made, and then review our level of understanding of the world around us. Okay, so like always, we start with this quote. What you see and what you hear depends a good deal on where you're standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are. Let's think about a movie that you've watched. So you're watching a movie with three other people. Based on the kind of individual you are, you realize that three of us might have very total different perception of the movie, very different interpretation. So one person is going to say, oh, that was the best movie in my whole life. Another person say, it was okay. And another person say, no, absolutely not. That was a horrible movie. Now, the reason why all of this is happening is because the way we perceive things, a lot of times, is a reflection of who we are. It's a reflection of what we think about. It's a reflection of what guides us and our principles and our personality as well will determine how we perceive and see other things. And a lot of times, it all depends on the angle you're looking at it from. So you see a person come into a room, and then because of the way you're looking, or how she looks or how he looks from the outside, you're going to have a perception about them based on what they wore, based on how they're talking. But you really don't understand what is going on in that person's mind. Do you know the reason why he wore the particular shirt he is wearing? Do you know the reason why she has a tattoo? No, you don't. So the truth is, everything that comes in line with our perception is usually based on who we are, how we see, the angle we are, and then based on the kind of person that we are. So again, what we're going to be going through is understanding our self-perception, our self-concept, understanding how we perceive others, and then finally creating strategies to make sure that all through the perception process, we are at least a great deal or in a better space. So I have this picture here. I would want to get your thoughts on this at some point. What do you see? So we know we see a boy, we see someone that looks like an officer. The boy is wearing the officer's cap. But what is the story? What story do you think is behind this particular picture? What do you think is happening? I really would want to hear what you're thinking. Now, if I get 10 different people to tell me what they think is happening here, you realize that chances are at least 3 of those 10 people we have very different perception of this. Again, based on maybe their past experience, maybe you've been in the same situation, based on their personality, based on how they view the world, their perception is absolutely different. So what is perception itself? Perception is the process of receiving information about and making sense of the world around us. So in all reality, we have to actually perceive our environment. The only way we make sense of anything around us is through perception, because we have a thought about where we are. We have a thought about the situation. We have a thought about the other person. That's the only way we are actually able to make some level of sense about anything that is working or going around in our world. So in terms of of perception, like I said earlier, there are two levels to it. There's self-perception, which is pretty much the same thing in terms of organizational behavior. There's always the self part, and then there's the others part. So self-perception looks at your self-concept. How do you see yourself? How do you view yourself? What do you think are your attributes? Would you say, if you had to define Debbie, what would you say Debbie is, or who would you say Debbie is? Then we have social perception, which is how we interpret information about another person. So what we want to do is get to a space where both levels of perceptions are actually done in the right way, where you are not putting such high emphasis on self and then putting very low emphasis on social perception, or where you're not putting such high emphasis on only social and then leaving self-perception to be anyhow. No, you want to get to a space where the both levels of perceptions are actually aligned and are actually right, at least as right as possible. Okay, so let's talk about self-perception. So self-perception is pretty much what we'll call self-concept. And your self-concept is your belief system about who you are. So an individual self-belief and self-evaluation. How do I see myself? How do I feel about myself? Who am I as a person? How would I describe myself? These are the things that will guide your decision and your actions. So if you believe yourself to be a very good person, you believe that you are a law-abiding citizen, you believe that you are, let's say, Christian, a Muslim, or a religious person, you realize that your actions, the decisions you make, might be aligned more with the perception you have of yourself. And it helps us to compare our current and our desired self. So I want you to always think about the fact that no matter how amazing you are now, there are still areas that you can actually improve on. So if you understand who you are right now, it's easier for you to understand ways in which you can improve as an individual. Now, in terms of how we view ourselves, a lot of times we view ourselves from an individual perspective, which is our personal traits, our personality, our attitude, our emotions, our values, our belief systems. And then we also view ourselves from a relational perspective, how we relate to others, so how we relate to friends, how we relate to co-workers. So I am introverted. Why? Because I naturally like being alone. At the same time, I feel like I'm introverted because of the way I relate with my co-workers. So at work, I'm not exactly the most friendly. Oh, I don't really have friends. Oh, I don't really see the need to have conversations, etc. So what we're doing is we're viewing ourselves not just in relation to ourselves alone, our individual self, but also in relation to our co-workers. So that's the relational self. And then finally, we also view ourselves in terms of our membership within organizations. So how do we see ourselves based on where we are? So for example, I would say, oh, I'm very interested in education and in ensuring that people are aligned in terms of their level of career, etc., or being knowledgeable. Now, why is that? Because I am a teacher. So based on the fact that I am someone that works in a college or in a university, when I view myself, that whole idea has become a part of me. Or I'm female, so I associate myself with other female or women in any gathering. And so when I have to define myself, that is also a thing that will lead to the way I perceive myself and perceive others. Or, oh, I'm Christian. And so because of the way I see myself as a Christian, there are things that would define me because of my religious background. All right. So in terms of self-concept, there are the three perspectives to it: the individual self, your personality. There's a relational self, which is how you relate with others. And then finally, the collective self, which looks at your perception from the group of people that you're working with, a group of people that you associate yourself with. So now in understanding the self-concept, because self is large and self has so many components to it, there's a very simple model which is called the self-concept model. And what this model does is it helps us to understand the different components of ourselves. It helps us understand and see, take a step back to really analyze who we are as individuals and how that might be either beneficial or how we can work on making it better. So with the self-concept model, we have what we call the 3 C's. The 3 C's are the core of your self-concept. Sometimes our self-concept has some level of complexity, so it's on a range. You could have a very complex self-concept or a very non-complex self-concept. Consistency, how consistent are you in terms of who you define yourself as? So as a daughter, as a teacher, is there some level of consistency in these things, or do you have to have different behavioral patterns when you are in different areas? So those are things we're going to look at. And then clarity, how clear, how sure are you about yourself? Now, those are the 3 C's of self-concept. And then we have the 4 selves. There are 4 selves to who you are as an individual. There's self-enhancement, self-verification, self-evaluation, and your social self. Your social self goes back to your relational self as well, how you relate with others. But we're going to go into each of them in details. So let's start with the self-concept characteristics. That's the 3 C's. So in the middle of who you are as an individual, there are 3 major things you have to look at: complexity, consistency, and then clarity. In complexity, the truth is we're really not one person, one self. So I'll give myself as an example. My name is Debbie. I am a daughter. I am a girlfriend. I am a CEO. So that means I manage people. I am a program head. So I also manage people in the different work that I do. I also like going out and having a good time. I like hiking. I like the beach parties. I like reading sometimes. I like watching TV. Now, what I've done is divide myself into the different categories that I see myself. So now Debbie, the teacher, is going to be different from Debbie, the wife, or Debbie, the girlfriend. In the classroom, because of the level of position that I am in, I have to probably make all the decisions or make some of the decisions to guide students along in the studies in whatever they're studying. But Debbie as a girlfriend, I am not exactly guiding the person that I am in a relationship with. Yes, we share, we're a partner, or we're in a partnership, but I am not guiding or leading the person in the right direction to flow. So sometimes it might become very difficult for me to remember when I'm in a relationship that, hey, you're not in class right now. It's not your duty to tell this person what to do. Or think about Debbie as the CEO of AfroHub. Now, in that situation, I have a good number of people that I am managing. I have to make strategic decisions. I have to be very present. There's so many characteristics I have to have there. Now, the Debbie there is not going to bring that same characteristics into the classroom. In the classroom, I'm relating with people that are probably waiting to learn. I'm relating with people that are most likely younger. I'm relating with people that are in the class because they have paid to learn from this particular experience. But at the workplace, I'm relating with people that are looking at me thinking, hey, you have to pay my salary, or hey, you have to ensure that the system works because I've devoted my time and energy into this startup, so I expect it to actually work. So what that means is, as individuals, we usually would have multiple selves. And then based on the number of selves you have, there might be some level of complexity, because you have to keep thinking, okay, in this situation, sometimes it comes naturally, but sometimes you see yourself mixing the behavioral pattern you have in one angle to yourself to a different angle. All right. So a lot of times when there's high separation among yourselves, among the different cells that you have, when they're not in any way related, what would happen is you're going to feel like there's a level of complexity, and it might be a little bit difficult for you to understand yourself. Now, based on that, let's go into consistency. So with consistency, we're saying it's easier when your self-concept or the different selves that you are all aligned. So as a teacher, as a program head, as a CEO, those are 3 very key areas of my life, but they are areas that are very aligned. So chances are most of the things I'm doing in all those 3 different areas are very similar. They might be changed based on the specific environment and based on the specific roles, but there's some level of leadership, there's a level of management that comes with all of this. And so because I keep doing this over and over and over again, it leads to some level of consistency, which makes it easier for me, because the different selves that I have very similar attributes, and then that makes it easier for me to understand who I am as an individual. So when I define myself, when I say who Debbie is, I'm going to most likely be taking things from all of these different selves, but because they are very similar, the definition or the idea that you have of Debbie or any other person has of Debbie is a little bit easier to be understood. Then finally, there's clarity. Now, clarity means just having a very clear description and stability in terms of who you are. Now, this happens over time. So maybe the first time I became a teacher, I didn't really see the difference in age gap. My age and the age of my students were literally about the same. So it was not so easy for me to differentiate that, okay, these are not your friends. These are people that you have to manage to an extent. But as time goes on, as I keep doing the job and I kept doing the job, I'm able to get more understanding of what is expected from me in every single job. And so it's my clarity of who I am as an individual is now a little bit more defined than it was 10 years ago. So in defining your self-concept, there should be some level of clarity. It doesn't happen overnight, but as years goes by, as you keep being consistent, as you keep learning through your processes, you realize that as you grow older as well, you realize that you start having some level of consistency in determining yourself. So think about your self-concept as the background, or the characteristics as background for self-concept. These are the foundations. These are the things that are building the whole perception that you have of yourself. Now, remember, we have the 3 C's here. Now, the next thing is the 4 cells. We're going to look at the 4 cells. So we're going to start with self-evaluation, which is here. So with self-evaluation, we're pretty much saying, how do you view yourself as an individual? How do you evaluate yourself? So we evaluate ourselves. We usually would determine whether we are the best person or not. So we are, to be honest, a lot of times, most of us are actually our greatest critic. So you would be the one to determine whether or not you are a good person. You'll be the one to determine what your worth is. And so in doing all of that, what we're doing is really aligning with our self-evaluation. And in self-evaluation, the first thing there is self-esteem. So self-esteem is your worth. How do you see yourself? What kind of worth do you think you have? Do you feel like you're valuable? Do you think you're a success, or do you think you're a failure? Now, in thinking through who your self-esteem or what your self-esteem is, it's like every other concept of self itself is usually based on experience. So if you have high self-esteem, it's maybe because you have experienced some level of clarity about yourself. You have gone through life. You have had several experiences and you came out of them strong. So sometimes let's start from the most basic things. If it's your first breakup, you most likely will cry and wail and watch TV and lick ice cream and do all of those nice sweet things. But if you come out of them thinking, oh my God, I don't think I would ever be able to get over this guy or this girl. But if you get over that guy or that girl, moving forward, you might get into another relationship and there might be a breakup. But you will never really have that same feeling of, oh, I think I'm going to die. Reason being, you've gone through it before, you came out of it, so you believe that you have the ability to come out of that particular heartbreak. The same thing with work. If you have a great job and you lose your job, the first time you ever lose your job, there's some level of fear. Or if you go to a new country, there's some level of fear, some level of uncertainty. But if you've done it a few times in the past, if you've moved from one job to another, if you've moved to a new country, you realize that over a period of time, you don't have so much fear again, because you naturally already believe that because I did it in the past, I most likely can still do it again. So our self-esteem usually comes from, based on successes that we've had. And when people have a lot of low self-esteem, or when people have low self-esteem, a lot of times it's because they've had a lot of failure in the past. They've had people telling them that they're not the best, and they really are not logical about their thinking. So this is also something that will determine how we define ourselves. Now, under self-evaluation, we also still have self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is basically much your belief that you are capable of dealing with life's events. So just the same thing like self-esteem, which is your worth, with self-efficacy, it's your belief in yourself. Do you think you can get out of this? Again, like I said, because you have gotten out of it in the past, you would think, such is life, we move, but we'll still be able to get things done. So self-efficacy pretty much looks at your ability to get out of things, deal with certain situations that happen in your life. All right. Now, still on that self-evaluation, we have locus of control. So another way we can determine how we see ourselves is based on our belief system that we actually have some level of control over life events. So with locus of control, it's either you're on the internal part, the higher end of the internal part, or you're more on the external part. And the internal part, really what you're saying is, I believe that to a very large extent, I have control over what happens to me. I'm going to be successful because I will put in the work. For this particular assignment, I'm going to get an A because I'm going to study really hard. I'm going to spend sleepless nights. I'm going to reach out to Debbie to ask for questions to just understand more about what I need to do for this particular assignment. So that is a high internal locus of control. On the other end, we have external locus of control. Now, these are people that feel that when it comes to things that are happening within their lives, they really have no control over it. So they always feel like it's the forces. Oh, I failed this exam because Debbie was mean to me. Or I failed this test because the stars have not aligned with me today. Or I failed this particular assignment because of this other person, or because the school is not so great, or because, the world is a bad place now. So everything that happens to them, they do not feel like, they have some level of control over their lives. They feel like this is something that is happening to them just because of what is happening outside themselves. So in terms of locus of control, this is just a quick test that you can do to see where your locus of control is. So if you have the lower numbers, that means you believe that you have some level of control over yourself and things that happen to you. If you're on this higher end, that means you feel like most of the things that happen to you are more external. So for me, for example, I'm somewhere in the middle I'm somewhere in the middle here because I feel to a large extent I have a large control over my life, but at the same time, because I believe in God and believe in divinity, I also think that there are certain things that are outside my control. So it's not really right or wrong. You want to always have a balance when it comes to your locus of control. You never really want to be too high on the internal or too low on the external, because really, if we think about the world that we are in now, there's still some level of influence that other people would have on you. All right, so I want you to think through this. So you have a team assignment. Your team gets a C in this assignment. Whose fault are you going to put it on? Who are you going to blame? Are you going to, this is definitely my team members minus myself. I did such a great job. I'm too sure they didn't do anything right. Or, no, this is definitely Debbie's fault. I've been seeing the way Debbie looks at us. I don't think she really wants us to have an A in this class. It's definitely Debbie's fault. Or would you look at it from an angle of maybe it's the entire team, including myself? Maybe we missed an information. Maybe we should reach out to Debbie to find out what areas we didn't get so great marks in so that we can learn from that particular example. All right. Now, the same thing, if you fall down 3 times between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m., whose fault is it? Would you say, maybe I need to pay more attention to my environment? Or would you say, the stars are maybe not aligned for me today. I think I should just stay indoors. So that's external. So for the first one, if you are saying your team members minus you, that means you're saying you have a high external locus of control. The same thing with the instructor's fault. That means your internal locus of control is most likely very high. However, if you're saying, maybe it's the entire team, including myself, you're somewhere in the middle thinking, okay, I have a control over what I get in my grade. However, I understand that Debbie or whoever my instructor is might have some level of control as well. So maybe I should reach out to them just to find as much information as possible to know what to do next. Now, the same thing with you falling down 3 times between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. If you think it's you, maybe you have a higher level of internal locus of control. However, if you're thinking it's, the stars, or maybe, something else, there's a force around here that is not allowing me to get the work done, then that shows you have a higher external locus of control and you want to take a look at it. Okay, so still under self-enhancement, so that is us done with self-evaluation. So here, now we're going to go into self-enhancement. All right, now with self-enhancement, what we're pretty much looking at is the way we perceive ourselves. A lot of times as individuals, we perceive ourselves better than we actually are. There's a tweak in our brain that you always would think you are the best thing since sliced bread. Now, that belief of fine-tuning and polishing your perception of yourself is what we call self-enhancement. And so like John Dewey has rightly said, the deepest urge in human nature is the desire to be important. So as far as you're concerned, the minute you enter a room, you are probably the most important person there. And so you expect everyone to maybe gravitate towards you just to ensure that you get the feeling of importance that you want. Now, not everyone has a very high self-enhancement perspective, but really, generally speaking, most times we have some level of self-enhancement in the sense that we usually do not see the flaws that we have. Most times we see only the great things that we have. And so in these statistics, for example, 94% of professors in a large American university rated their teaching as above average compared with others at their university. So I'm sure you've had that instructor, Debbie might be one of them, that really thinks, oh, I really do a good job with teaching you. But in your mind, you're looking at this person and thinking, I don't really think you're a good professor, I think you're actually one of the worst. Now, what is really happening is just that you as an individual, or a professor as an individual, would always think they are doing better than the other person. But how others are seeing them might actually be quite different. Now, the third angle to self-concept is self-verification. So like every other thing, we always want to verify our status in life. So we usually want to confirm or maintain what our self-concept is. So you think you're a really amazing person. A lot of times you're going to be trying to find out if truly you are still as amazing. And so we do that by trying to get feedback, by communicating our self-concept to others and seeing how they perceive it. So if I keep saying, oh, I'm such an amazing teacher, all the students I've ever taught liked me. That's my way of gauging to see if, okay, do you guys think the same? So if I see your face go, I don't know, I'm like, oh, maybe my idea of myself is not really what is still aligning up till now. Or the same way you also will think about it from your own perspective, that, I don't know. You actually, if someone says, oh, I think you're really great, I'm like, okay, so I'm still as great as I used to be. So what we always do is we always try to verify to see if our evaluation or our definition of our self-concept is still the same over and over again. And it's normal human nature. And then finally, in terms of the four selves, we have the social self. So the social self is also our need to define ourselves to some degree by the groups we belong to or we have an emotional attachment to. So think about this as an external self-concept. So like I said earlier, I am Debbie. I am a woman. So a lot of times the way I would define myself is based on the fact that I am female. Oh, I am an immigrant to Canada. So I'm going to define myself based on the fact that I'm an immigrant to Canada, and I'm going to try to say, okay, for my nationality, which is Nigerian, and my Canadian part, the Canadian part of me, I'm going to define myself by picking things from the two different cultures. Or I'm a minority. And so because of that, in my definition of myself, there's some level of minority that will come into the conversation. So what really happens is most times as individuals, our self-concept, the way we define ourselves, is not just in isolation to who we are as individuals, but also in isolation to the groups that we feel some sort of connection with. So if you are, let's say, in a church, for example, or you're a Christian, or you're a Muslim, or you're a religious person, you're going to define yourself a lot of times based on what you believe. The same thing with organizations. So as a BCIT student, for example, one of your key definition is based on, BCIT students are said to be the best students. When they graduate, they always get jobs. And so when you come into BCIT, you have that perception that, because of all the tasks that I am going through, I most likely would be able to pass through BCIT as a better person. I am now a very efficient person because I'm able to do a lot of assignments and I'm able to do them effectively despite the time pressure that we have in BCIT. So what happens is we tend to define ourselves based on our social identity, and then a lot of times we contrast it to other people. So, our organization is different from that organization, so the way I see myself is totally different. My class, as a woman, I'm different from men, so I'm going to see the differences in terms of men and women. Or, as a Canadian, this is how we behave. So I'm going to see the differences between myself and someone that is not Canadian. All right. So that is social concept. That is everything about social concept. So I want you to think. Do you define yourself in terms of the school you attend, the organization that you attend, etc.? It would be nice for me to hear how you actually see yourself in terms of all of this. Okay. All right. Moving on. Social perception. So social perception comes into play with how we perceive others. So remember I said when it comes to perception, there's a self part, which is you, and then there's a social part, which is how you see other people. And your social perception usually is influenced by 3 different characteristics. The characteristics of you, who is the perceiver. How you think will determine how you perceive others. Where you're from will determine how you perceive others. Your background, your social concept in entirety will determine how you perceive others. Also the target. So when we look at the other person, there are certain things that we're seeing, and those are the things that will determine how we actually perceive the person. So what are they wearing? The way a person is dressed will determine how we actually perceive that person. The way they act will determine how we would perceive that person. And then finally, the situation. So if a person is wearing jeans in an office setting where they are probably giving the most important meeting of their life, you're probably going to look at them like, whoa, really? You are in front of Elon Musk right now and you decided to wear this? Or maybe it's the torn jeans and all of that, and they have the hair everywhere. That's you as a person because of how you perceive yourself and the situation they find them finding themselves in. But if, for example, the person is trying to make it, just random on the road wearing jeans and has their hair colored, you most likely will not really care about how they look, because in that particular situation, it's not necessary for you to see how they look, or it's not necessary for you to judge them. And I'm using the word judge lightly. It's not necessary for you to judge them based on the way they look. Now, in terms of all of this, let's look at, the different signs that we have in perception. So even based on where you are, certain things are acceptable to you. So in certain places, for example, it's okay for you to do certain signs. In another place, it might mean something else. So you definitely want to be sure about the places that you are in, the situation you are in, because that would determine a lot about how people will perceive you in those situations. Now, like I said earlier, in terms of social perception, there are 3 major characteristics. There's a perceiver characteristics, there's a target characteristics, and then there's a situational characteristics. So perceiver characteristics, how familiar you are with the target. So if it's someone that you really, really know, the way you perceive them, regardless of what is happening at that particular situation, would not really be different because you already know them as an individual. So let's say you go into, you are in a group, and then in your group, there's a particular person that is always the last to submit their assignment. And then for the first time ever, they are very effective and they want to be part of contribution and etc. Because you're very sure you've seen them, you've related with them a lot of times. Despite the fact that they're trying to seemingly be very effective, you most likely would not be buying it. Because you're going to think, I know you. You are not exactly the most effective person. Or think about it from the other angle. If you have a group member that is very effective, and then the one time she or he is not so forthcoming in assignments, you're not going to quickly have a perception that, oh, he's a lazy person, she's a lazy person. The reason why you're not going to quickly do that is because you're familiar with them, you're familiar with their characteristics and how they are as individuals. So it's very difficult for you to judge them based on just one situation. The same thing, your attitude and your mood. So when you're really happy, you most likely would be perceiving people in a brighter mood. But when you're more sad or you don't exactly feel excited about certain things, you might not really be perceiving in a very positive mood at the time. Also, how you see yourself, like we talked about, the way you think about things will also determine how you perceive others. Then from the target characteristics, like I said earlier, their physical appearance, how you look, how you speak, the verbal cues, the non-verbal cues, their intentions. Those are things that will determine how we perceive others. And then situational characteristics, interaction context. So how a person acts in the boardroom is most likely different from how they'll act in the market, or how they'll act if they go to the gym, or how they'll act when they're in the club. So all of those things will determine how we perceive people. Now, in terms of social perception, there are several barriers to social perception. We have selective perception, when we decide to pick certain characteristics and that's all we hold on to. So we don't necessarily allow ourselves to accept the person in full. We're just specific on a particular characteristic, and then we keep holding on to that when we have to define a particular person. Stereotype. So when we're looking at the barriers, I should say these barriers are things that would not allow us to actually perceive people in the right way. Barriers are things that will make us make certain judgments about people and situations that are most likely wrong. So stereotypes, for example, we feel that women are loud. And so because of that, whenever you're in a setting with a woman, you're thinking, oh, she's quite loud, even though she hasn't said anything. Or if you women are naturally quiet, or women should not be working. Based on the kind of perception you have, stereotype you have about a woman, about a man, about a particular race, about a particular religious backing, you realize that might determine how you view people from that particular area. Or first impression error. So sometimes you see a person, you love the person at the beginning, and so regardless of any other thing that happens, because you loved them from the beginning, you always have that at the back of your mind. Or if you see them and the first time you talked to them, maybe they were just not the best, they were in a bad mood, and so they didn't have the best experience, or you didn't have the best experience with them. And so because of that, you always will have it at the back of your mind that, oh my God, no, absolutely not, I do not like this person, or I really love this person. Or recency effect. Recency effect, this is when you make a decision or have a perception about a person based on the most recent thing that happened. So if, for example, you're working in an organization and you've been amazing, but the one time you made a mistake was very close to when you had your peer review or your review with your manager, and your manager dwells on that particular mistake, then you realize that is based on the most recent thing, and he or she is having a perception based on that. The same thing with contrast effect, projection, self-fulfilling prophecy, when we always think, okay, when you've thought from the beginning, this is a great person, and regardless of any mistake they make, because you've already said something, you've already had a perception about them, you are sticking to the fact that, oh, this person is so much like me, or this person, I have said this particular thing about the person, and then you keep going with that. All right, so now in terms of how to improve these perceptions, the first part is, we as human beings, we have our perceptual biases. That's the truth. No matter how amazing you are, sometimes you have the wrong self-concept, and then you also have a wrong social concept or social perception. So you just being aware about the fact that maybe you're not seeing yourself in the right way, being aware about the fact that maybe you are stereotyping someone, or being aware of the fact that there are the differences between how you're seeing a person and how other people are seeing a person, that can be a way to actually improve your perception. So being aware, being mindful of your thoughts and actions, right? And then the next thing is to improve your self-awareness. So learn more about yourself. If you know yourself more, if you take some time to actually study yourself, you realize that you might actually benefit more from your self-concept. So remember, the way you see yourself and the way you see others, a huge play from how you see yourself. So take some more time to be aware about yourself. And in doing that, you should use what we call the Johari window, which is pretty much you defining who you are as an individual, looking through the different parts of yourself, and then defining your total self-concept. And then finally, have meaningful interaction. When you're talking with people, have that need for empathy. Listen to what the other person has to say. Don't be speaking, don't be learning, don't be having conversations and interactions just for the cause of. Actually be mindful about the kind of conversations you're having. Speak to learn, listen to learn, and don't just have concrete ideas, or this is how it is, and you assume that that's how it's always going to be. All right, now the last thing I want us to see is impression management. A lot of times, when you are trying to create an idea of yourself, what you're doing is controlling the impression that other people would have of you. So what you're doing is what we call impression management. So think about impression management by creating an image. So this is who I am. I am Debbie. I smile a lot. I give you strong handshakes. I'm very confident. And so when I'm talking to people, based on this impression or this idea of who I want to be, I would try to do all these things just to make sure that people see me for the kind of person that I want them to see me as. Now in impression management, all you're doing is just using self-enhancing techniques, learning people's names, putting out the information there, using other enhancing techniques like dropping up, flattering the other person, doing favors, being assertive, bringing out your hand, pretty much just to make sure that people can see you for the kind of person that you want them to see you as. All right, so in total, what I wouldn't want us to take from this entire conversation is, when it comes to managing people, when it comes to being the best version of yourself, you always have to take a step back and remember that you would always have perception about you and others. So why can't we make sure that our perception is as truthful as possible? And the only way we can do that is by being a little bit calm, taking a step back, and then actually analyzing the entire situation we find ourselves in. All right. So I hope this was very helpful to you. I would love to hear your thoughts on this and how you perceive yourself. Thank you so much for listening.